Hello, and welcome to Books to Last, the podcast that challenges readers to pick the only 5 books they may take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. As ever, I am joined by a book-loving guest, and this episode I'm joined by Cara. Welcome, Cara. It's so great to have you on the podcast. It's been something I've wanted to sell for ages, so I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here.
For the benefit of any listeners who might not know you and anything that you do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and you and books and all that good reading stuff?
Sure. I met Jordan through our book club. We both go to Duke Club in Stoke. But I think my love of reading goes back a little bit further than that. So I've always loved reading. I like escapism. I was a bit of a nerdy, weird little kid who would sit with under the covers. And that was probably the most rebellious thing that I ever did as a child. Yeah, I'd carried that love into adulthood, lost it a little bit after uni, as lots of us who did arts degrees do. And then I've refound it over the last few years, thanks to Duke Club and all of the kind of fun book clubbing friends that I've made. Yeah, that's kind of it. They've carried me through life. I love them.
That's amazing. I find it quite funny to think of that being the only, because that's probably also the most rebellious thing I did, but I would have thought that you were much more rebellious.
I think I got much more rebellious as a teenager. I'm thinking like as a little pre-14-year-old Cara. And then I suddenly discovered alcohol and like books went out the window for a bit.
It happens to the best of us. Yeah, no, I remember being in trouble. Some people get in trouble for trying to skip school, and I got in trouble for staying up until early hours of the morning reading when I should have been asleep.
Same. So, I was never trying to skip school. I loved school. I was just a little nerd.
Yeah, same. School was great. I loved school. You just got to spend so much time there. It's really, you're gaming the system if you like it. So.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the last great book that you read recently?
Oh, that's a hard one. I feel like I've been on a bit of a spell of really good books. And I don't know if it's because I've got really into fantasy recently. And I think anyone who knows me probably assumes that I'm like predominantly a fantasy reader, so they might be a little surprised by the books I've chosen for today. I think the last one that I really loved was Fourth. I don't know, a lot of top books have been a bit of a disappointment for me, but it was the first one where I was like, oh my God, I want to stay up till 1 a.m. reading this again. And the ending really surprised me. But I'm trying to avoid any spoilers because I haven't read the next book in the series and I'm not getting it until it comes out in paperback because
you want them to match.
I want them to match. They need to match. And also, I really don't like the cover of the hardback one. It's a weird copper colour, and copper is, I don't know, it's a rose goldy kind of, not my thing. But yeah, that's one that really stands out recently. There's been a lot of goodies though, I think.
Yeah, you have been onto a bit of a winning streak recently. I've been a bit meh with all of my recent books.
I think we go through stages though. I don't know. I'm annoyed. Like, there was part of me that was like, I just want to read something a bit bad to make sure that I've just not lowered my standards. Because I was like, why am I rating everything like 4 and 5 stars? Do I just any people just recommending me stuff and I'm like, oh my God, I automatically love it. People pleasing.
It's just like, oh my God, am I becoming too positive? Am I becoming too?
Yeah. And then I had a 1-star read and I was like, it's okay. It's okay. She's back.
Awesome. That's a good taste. And I'm interested to see what you've picked if you've not gone down the sort of fantasy route. But as mentioned before, you're going to pick the 5 books you're going to take with you when you're cast away. As ever, you are not relegated to a desert island because I have historically on the podcast always claimed that I hate sand, which is why I don't make anyone go to a desert island. Although I think I've come around to the beach a little bit since the podcast started. But you get to pick any location to be cast away to. So where would you like to go with your books?
I think I'm going to pick somewhere on the Isle of Skye. So after lockdown, like end of 2021, I think. I don't know when lockdown ended. There were so many. Me and my sister went on a little kind of like reconnecting road trip and we ended up going to Skye. And I spent quite a lot of time when I was there crying because I was so badly midge bitten. So if I could do Skye without the midge, that would be perfect. I don't know. I love the landscape. It feels like this magical portal that I just felt instantly at home there. So take me there away from everybody, please. Like right now.
Yeah, Isle of Skye is somewhere I've wanted to go for a while. Scotland is just gorgeous. But yeah, midges are like there's like an actual website dedicated to tracking the level of midges in Scotland because they're so bad during the summer.
It's the fact we went in September and I was like, okay, it's fine. We'll avoid them. Like, it's not mid-season. God forbid I'd gone in summer. I was like, honestly, bitten. I must taste amazing. I must taste amazing.
Yeah, it's a compliment. It's a compliment, really. Yeah. My husband and I, we went wild camping in the Scottish Highlands in August of 2020 because we thought wild camping, great. We won't see anyone. Oh,
That is brutal.
sleeping in lakes and fields during August in Scotland was tricky.
I can imagine. That sounds like actual hell. I feel like I'm a creature comforts person. I'm quite outdoorsy and I like hiking and stuff, but give me a bed, please, for the love of God. I'm not a camper anymore.
I think true wild campers probably would have looked at our setup and thought we were babies. We did wild babies. We did not stray too far from the car. We had the dog with us and we took an airbed because my
Oh yeah. I don't know how I used to rough it. I'm a big festival fan. And I don't know how I used to do it. I used to just go with literally a sleeping bag and I was just like, this is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to go camping all the time with just one of the very thin sort of camping mats just to keep the cold off, basically. And that was like all I'd sleep on. And now I'm like, if you ask me to decide, no, it's too difficult. I may be a 20-something, but I've got the back of someone much older.
Yeah, same. It's all the stress, Jordan. We're just carrying it on our shoulders.
Yeah, it's stress and sitting. Okay, so you're off to the Isle of Skye in a very comfortable cabin or lodge of some description,
Yeah,
not roughing it in a tent, and ideally in a midgy-free zone.
Midge-free. That is the key.
Okay, so what's the first book you're going to be taking with you to the Isle of Skye?
I think my first one is quite good for what we've just been talking about, actually. So my first book is Landlines by Raina Wynn, which is ironic because there's a lot of wild camping in that book. But I think this was the book that got me into nature writing a little bit more. I read Raina Wynn's books in totally wrong order. I read them in reverse, which I don't think it particularly mattered. Maybe other people would disagree with that, but it's just a fabulous book. It explores Raina and her husband Moss basically doing just a really long distance walk from right at the far end of Scotland all the way back down to their home in Cornwall. And it's just magical. I feel like she's so good at describing the landscapes that feel very familiar to me, particularly some parts of Yorkshire. And she also describes bits of the Peak District that obviously I live in a tiny little market town called Leek, which is right on the edge of the Peak District in the UK. And yeah, just nature is really important to me and to my family. And I absolutely love that book. It felt really inspiring. It made me want to get up and go for a walk.
It sounds like a really powerful one. It's always really difficult, I think, for writers to really capture nature in a way that kind of brings it in, but when it is done really well, it's better than almost all fiction.
I think I like books as escapism, so it's weird for me to love this one so much because it's real world, and the bits that I really enjoy actually are the bits that are probably set nearest to where I live. But I think it's like that idea that someone can capture the way that you feel about places that feel like home so beautifully that it makes me really emotional thinking about it. And yeah, their journey is just very empowering, inspiring.
That's really, being able to see and touch places as well. Because you mentioned you're a fantasy reader. I always find it really interesting to try and find the places that inspired the fantasy places, because you can tell usually in the depth of the writing when there's a real place behind it, because I think there's just so many layers to it and you get that feeling when you're in those places. I think it's a really interesting one. That's a really cool one to start off with, and a nice naturey book to be reading whilst you're in a very nice naturey place.
Yeah, I thought it'll remind me a little bit of home and of other places that I've been. So get me out of just being stuck in my cabin on my own.
Yes. Although in this over digital age, probably be a bit of bliss for this short term.
Yeah, maybe.
Okie doke, we've got a nice nature. Sorry, is it a fiction
No,
novel or
so it's
non-fiction?
non-fiction, but it feels fictionalized, but it's actually not. I don't know. I'm not normally like a non-fiction person, but actually two of the books that I've picked technically non-fiction, they're like autobiographical. I would
Well,
say
I suppose,
it falls into that category.
yeah, I suppose a lot of people who aren't fans of non-fiction is because they're there for the story, and I suppose autobiography straddles it quite nicely because you've got it's someone's
Yeah.
story, isn't
I
it?
think it's
So,
called,
okay.
I think something I really like about fantasy is that element of the journey. And
Yeah.
this entire book is just one really long, really difficult journey.
Good. And kudos to the author for being able to really sit down and serialize it because I think it's quite an impressive thing to be able to do because usually once you're at the end of the journey, some of the journey rewrites itself
Yeah.
because of where you are at the end of it. So yeah, really interesting one. I'll have to check that out because that sounds I could do with some motivation to go for a walk, to be honest, because the weather's starting to turn to that point where I'm just a bit like, oh, but it is cold. Okay, so what is the second book you'll be taking with you along with Landlines?
Ooh, you know what? We'll stick with kind of the similar theme and get those out of the way first so that we can do like some of the different ones later. The second book I would take is a book called It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet by James Herriot. So this is one in a very long series of books about a vet. James Herriot is a vet, and it's books about just his experiences with the animals that he looks after in the Yorkshire Dales. And bizarrely, it is like when I went through my massive reading slump, and I'm talking like multi-years long, read one book a year that was new. This was like a book that I would go back to when I wanted to read because it's just really funny. And the way that he talks about the Yorkshire Dales is, again, really beautiful and evocative of the experiences that I had growing up. So my mum's side of my family is from Yorkshire. And she bought me the books originally as a kid. I think because she was like, "You're from Yorkshire." I was like, "I'm not from Yorkshire. I've never lived there." But this is like my little nod to her side of the family. And it's one of the few books that it doesn't matter how many times I read it, I still laugh at the way that he describes the chaos that is working with animals.
Oh, I feel like being a vet's probably a really harrowing experience.
Yeah, I would say some of it sounds slightly traumatic, but he just turns everything into a really funny story. Oh yeah, I had to go out onto the moorland in the middle of winter and help to birth a calf. But like you find yourself laughing at it, even though I imagine in and of the moment it was horrifying for him.
Yeah. So this is just my life. This is just what I do.
Yeah.
Identity of being from Yorkshire, but not from Yorkshire, I could definitely relate to because my mum's family are all from Yorkshire as well. I have been there a handful of times.
It's really weird. Like one of my friends still has me saved in his phone as Yorkshire, even though I'm not from there. And I don't claim to be, but I think like particularly as a kid and a teenager, like every holiday it was like, "Oh, why can't Cara come hang out?" And it's because I'm in Yorkshire. So
Yeah.
it becomes like,
State
yeah,
mind.
Yorkshire is a state of mind. And I think people from there are really proud of being from there. And I am very happy to be an honorary joiner of the Yorkshire movement. Even if I do have a couple of friends who are properly from Yorkshire and they would definitely not agree that I'm from Yorkshire. They'd be like, absolutely not.
Yeah, Yorkshire doesn't really subscribe to the same. It's like in America, because they obviously, a lot of them can trace their heritage back to like different, like UK, Europe, for reasons that we don't need to go into. But like, there's like in I think if you've got Irish blood, it subscribes to like the one drop of blood thingy. If you've got even a little bit of Irish in you, you are Irish, basically, as far as
Yeah.
like I said. Yorkshire doesn't really subscribe to that.
No.
If you can't birth a sheep, then like, or do some other Yorkshire related thing.
I enjoy that we're like throwing out all the stereotypes right now. It's just beautiful.
Yeah,
But
visit farms. That's all there is up there.
yeah. We were talking about that, so technically it will.
Absolutely. And yeah, so these are your two nonfiction picks, both of them very centered on sort of countryside and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think I was thinking about when I was like, if I'm in a cabin on my own, I'm quite a people person. I don't really cope well with being on my own at all. I'm very extroverted. I was thinking, I think I'll want some ties to people and places that I really love to get me through the experience of being trapped in a cabin with nothing but my thoughts and 5 books. So yeah, there was a little bit of tacticalness to this, I think.
Fair enough, and that's always something to consider. Have you got pets?
Yes. So I didn't have any pets growing up. But I don't know if that's part of why I loved these books growing up, because I didn't have any pets. My parents were not pet people. But I have a little old lady cat now. She's 14. She's called Bells. At one point, I thought she was going to join this podcast recording because I was eating a bacon sandwich before it started, and she was like very intently wanting to hang out with me. But she made the wise decision and has gone straight back to bed.
Yeah, lots of pets want to be on the podcast. We are hoping to branch out in our guests to include. My dog, if he hears me talking to my computer, I can be talking to myself or the baby or anything, just round the house, no interest. He hears me talking to my computer, he's like, people, attention, I must be there.
They have a sixth sense, I think. They just know the most inconvenient time for them to come and grace your screen.
The vet who writes the series of books, it's not the famous one off telly, is it? Or is this a different vet?
Yeah, it's not. Are you thinking about Noel Fitzpatrick?
I think so, yeah.
So, not that one, but there was a TV series based on this series of books. I think it's called All Creatures Great and Small. Don't quote me to that. I might have it wrong because that is also the sort of him. But yeah, there was definitely a TV series of it, but I've never watched it. I don't know.
There for the book.
The book
only.
is better.
You're curious.
The book is better, and it came out, I think, before I was born.
It's funny how that happens, especially stuff that's passed down from relatives. My husband is a big fan of Bob Ross, and he had no idea that Bob Ross was long dead before he even started watching those videos during the summer holidays with his granddad. It's just it's funny how time blind you are when you're young and the things that you find interesting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I watched a lot of Tim as a child.
Yeah, same. I think that my granddad was the person who was like originally into James Herriot books, and they've just been passed down.
Oh, nice.
So yeah,
nice family tradition.
A family tradition of reading the same book. It might even be the same copy of the book, to be honest, because it's sat on my shelf and it is dilapidated, to say the least.
The best kinds. Okay, I'm really excited to see what fiction pitch you've gone with now that you've gone with some very surprising sort of non-fiction ones to start off with. So what's the third book you're taking?
So my third book is going to be The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It is a book that's haunted me academically, but I absolutely love it. So I first encountered it when I was doing my GCSEs. I thought it was amazing. I was like, oh my God. Young Cara was a little pretentious, it's safe to say.
We all are.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I like beatnik writing and I like the 1920s America. And you know what? I still do, but with slightly less pretension now. But yeah, so first read it when I was a teenager and I just thought it was amazing. I was like, you fit so much into such a short amount of text. And it really sparked like my love of American literature. I think before that, I don't know, you get exposed to all like the British classics first, I think, when you're in the UK educational system. And then suddenly I had this teacher who was like, I am going to teach you all the American texts that are on the syllabus instead because they're more interesting. And yeah, it really sparked that kind of love of writing and the technical side of writing. But yeah, I did my final English exam on it for my GCSEs and got a terrible mark on that exam. And then the exact same thing happened when I was at uni. So I did American literature at university. University of Nottingham. It was a long time ago. And again, did my final exam on it and got a terrible mark. And I think it's because I like it too much. I can't be like analytical. I can't be analytical. I can't be critical of it. I love it. To the point that I have now got, I've got 2 book-related tattoos, but it is the only one that I have a quote from on my body.
Yeah.
So, the best.
What's the quote? I'm curious.
It is the second to final line. It's boats against the current. So the full quote is, oh God, I'm going to butcher it now, aren't I? So we'd be on, no, I can't remember. Oh God, I can't do this.
It's
But
okay. It's fine. I have to put you on this.
it says something about boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And I just think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, I find it because I think we have touched on it briefly in conversations we've had before, and I don't think because I don't really connect as much with the American literature as much. It's one of those things I really want to, but when
I feel
you're
the
just not quite
same.
meeting it.
I feel the same about British literature, specifically the classics, because I exposed myself a little bit on my Bookstagram the other day, because I was like, I've got a master's degree in literature and I've never read anything by Jane Austen, and I don't like Charles Dickens, and I feel like
I don't like Charles Dickens. To be fair.
I'll make one exception. I do like Great Expectations, but probably because Lady Havisham is a totally unhinged character and I'm obsessed with it. But yeah, most of the kind of classic British books, I don't know if they're just a bit stuffy for me, and I think probably not so much anymore.
Themes.
Let's not get into American politics, but like I always liked the idea of that American dream, like self-made person, the fact that like the conditions of where you're born doesn't need to impact like where you can go in the world. I think I always liked that, and I think a lot of traditional classic British literature was written at a time when we had like much clearer class divides, and maybe I was just like, oh, I just hate this.
I was just going to say the same thing. I think a lot of British classic literature does basically fall along lines of class and social mobility and that sort of thing, and that's basically where a lot of it's preoccupied with, because that was our main preoccupation for most of the time it was being done. Whereas I think like you say, a lot of the American literature it's very much looking at different issues than that, and that was, I think because I'm like, I cannot stand John Steinbeck with every fibre of me. I just hate everything I've ever read by him.
Whereas I have got The Pearl on my TBR. It's sat on my TBR shelf and I'm planning on reading it soon, because I've liked
I think I tried 3 and then
Grapes of Wrath I found a bit of a slog.
That was the second one I tried.
Yeah.
But I did read The Great Gatsby, and I did actually find it really interesting. I did actually really enjoy it. But I don't know whether you think I always wanted a little bit more. I felt like a lot of it was shrouded in mystery behind curtains. I want to know what's happening.
I love that. I think recently I've realized like I don't like horror or thriller, but I like having some blanks that I need to fill in. I think it keeps it a little surreal and spooky without being surreal or spooky. And yeah, I just think that like whole age of kind of 1920s prohibition glamour, teenage me was like, oh, it's so romantic and fabulous. And
and to be fair, one thing that really did stand out to me is I do like that I like the narrator that you're given, because he's not someone who's not really about him. It's about his observations of other people. And I did actually think that was quite an interesting way to view that story from, because in another universe, it could have been a very different story told from
and I think
one
it's
of the main
interesting
parties involved.
I think it's interesting because like people talk about like reliability of narrators, and I don't know that Nick, who narrates The Great Gatsby, is necessarily like a reliable narrator, but I think he's arguably slightly more reliable than everybody else in that book.
Yeah.
Because it's a book filled with horrible people that he humanizes and makes you like and root for.
He's one of the only people who isn't drunk the whole way through.
Pretty much. I just think, and again, this is probably pretentious 16-year-old Cara coming through. I just really love the use of imagery and colour and how that all links together. And I think I'm not a person who we've had lots of conversations about this offline, but oh my God, I've forgotten the word for it. Aphantasia. I basically can't create images in my head, or at least not clear images. So I think I find like that use of like really describing like the colours of different things quite helpful, because it takes some of that like work of like imagination in quotation marks, because I just did the air quotes and then realised that nobody can see my face. It takes some of that work out of it for me. Yeah. I think that's something that I love about it.
Yeah, and to be fair, you're right. Until you said that, I hadn't really thought, but I've got some very sort of distinct images in my head of when I read the book, which aren't connected, because I've never seen any of the on-screen adaptions. but I can picture certain scenes and things from the book, which I hadn't realized I'd retained because I read it like last year.
Yeah.
And like I said, I enjoyed it, but wasn't in love with it. But even so, I can still recall it. So yeah, no, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. So yeah, Great Gatsby is one that I suspected might make the list.
Yeah.
It was knowing your personal love for it.
It was one of the ones where it just went straight on. And there's been a few where I've moved things on and off because I do have a few honorable mentions. They was the one where I put it on and I was like, there is no doubt. There is no doubt. And you know what? Ironically, I don't own a copy of it, which I think is quite shocking. I went through a really weird, terrible minimalist phase where I got rid of all my books with the exception of like maybe 2 or 3. And for some reason, I got rid of it, which I have a huge amount of regret over it. And also, if my mum is listening, I'm really sorry because she bought me a special edition that I did get rid of during the minimalist phase. But we live, we learn, and we now spend all of our adult money recollecting.
Yeah. So you're going to be trawling through secondhand bookstores and you're going to start just finding like your copies of books reading.
We love a circular economy.
Yes, it's good to donate your books. Everyone should donate books if they don't want them anymore. So we're on the 4th book, the penultimate book on your list. What is the 4th book?
Oh, okay. I've got 2 and I don't know which one to pick. I'm going to go with this one. It's called The Buddha in the Attic. It's by a Japanese American writer called Julie Otsuka. And it essentially is a book that tells the story of not postal brides, but like Japanese women in pre-war America who moved to America to marry predominantly white American men. The whole story is told from the third person collective. I think I've got that right. I don't know. But the whole story is basically narrated by the entire group of women at the same time.
Wow.
I've just never experienced another book that does that. And I think it really was like the thing that sparked my interest in, obviously it's Japanese American and the author is like a 2nd generation Japanese American citizen. So she's an American citizen, but her family is from Japan. Yeah. But it really sparked my interest in learning more about Japanese history and Japanese literature. And I've definitely taken that with me throughout the rest of my reading journey. And I know it's become a lot more popular in recent years, but I've loved it for a really long time. And that book I just thought was totally different to anything I'd read up to that point.
Yeah, it sounds different to anything I've read. I think I've been trying to make an effort to do with more translated fiction and that sort of thing. Yeah. I know this isn't translated with being an American citizen, but I know that you're a big fan of translated Japanese fiction and stuff. And I just think, I don't know, it's good to have those it's good that it's been recognized that there's very distinct perspectives of these different novels coming out of different sort of diasporas and that sort of thing. Yeah. And the collective that I feel like that I'd take some getting used to. I'm a very boring third person omnipresent narrator is my preference.
Yeah, and I've never come across it again ever. I think it's interesting. I feel like it does a really good job of showing that these people are all having different experiences, but fundamentally they're the same. And it just tells a story that I don't think you hear a lot about. I think it's quite a hidden story. She also has another book, which is probably, like I should say, from honorable mentions, but it's called When the Emperor Was Divine. And it tells the story of the Japanese American internment during the Second World War. So I don't know if people might not have heard of this. It was like a total revelation to me when I ended up studying it quite heavily at university because I became hyperfixated and obsessed with it. Obsessed not in a good way because it was a bad thing. Yeah. But it was basically after Pearl Harbor in America, the American government had a kind of, I think it was a 2-question system, which were 2 yes or no questions that they asked all Japanese American males. But then the whole communities of Japanese American people were basically rounded up and put into internment camps, which basically it just decimated entire communities, and it happened all across North America, including Canada. And it's a really dark, but I think quite hidden part of US history that a lot of people just don't know about.
Yeah, a lot of and I group the UK and sort of America, they like to, we don't, quote unquote, we don't do that sort of thing. That's something that bad guys do, quote unquote. And it's very much,
Yeah.
they don't, a lot of Western, I hate that thingy, but a lot of Western cultures don't like to really dig into the less savory parts of their
Yeah.
history,
I think
which doesn't leave them with a
sometimes,
fat lot to talk about,
no,
really.
I think as well, the way that we're taught about the kind of two world wars when we're in school, I'm sure other people have
Oh,
spoken about like war literature, 'cause
yeah,
it's like a big deal,
yeah,
particularly in the UK and I'm sure in America. I wouldn't know. I'm not from there.
yeah.
But I think that there's a very like specific kind of narrative of like good and bad, and it's very clear cut. And that's not to say that there weren't like horrific things that happened within Europe at that time, as we all know. But yeah, this was just a period of history that I had no idea about. And
Mm.
yeah, Julie Otsuka writes about those elements of Japanese American history that maybe are glossed over or not known about as much. And she does so beautifully. Her work is stunning.
It's good. There seems to be a much needed and growing trend in sort of authors from different cultures shining lights on the hidden parts of history
Yeah.
or the lesser known parts of history and really bringing them to light, especially in fiction, which I think is really important
Yeah.
because I think nonfiction is great and it tells a lot of really important stories, and historians should do that. But I think history books and nonfiction books aren't as accessible to a lot of people. And I
100%.
think the way it's really well known is if you have the fictionalized version, the same way we've got 100 million different sort of war stories for World War I and World War II. That's why it's so in the psyche of what people know and
100%.
understand about it.
I think as well, her books are really short. So I am not, despite, again, we've mentioned that I'm a fantasy fan. Sometimes you just don't want to read 700 pages. And her books are, I want to say around the 200-page mark. Like they're pretty short.
Yeah.
And they're definitely quite accessible if you can get over the third person plural thing, which I admit is weird, but it really works for this story. It's so good.
It's like a gear shift. I think with most, I'm like that with, if I read Austen, because it's not the way that I think or speak, but you give yourself a few chapters and your brain shifts into that language, and it's like a point when it becomes clear. And I think it's the same with most books. I'm not quite at the point where I can read Shakespeare and it becomes super clear. I still need the footnotes to explain. But I do, yeah, I think with anything, I think you probably get used to it. I've not attempted a Sally Rooney book where she doesn't use quotation marks, so I can't say if I get used to it.
No.
But so we're on your final book on what has been a really intriguing list and very different from what I was probably expecting. So that's actually quite nice. What is the last book you'll be taking with you?
My last book is one that got recommended to me at Duke Club, and I think I will explain it in a minute and say what it is. But I think when it was recommended to me, it was at a time where I'd been like coming to book club fairly regularly, but maybe I hadn't opened up to that level where you get to know people on a slightly deeper level through what they read. And this book was recommended to me because it was short and quick, and someone just said that they were like, had never read anything like it. So the book is Life on the Refrigerator Door by Alice Coupers. It basically tells the story of a mum and her daughter through the notes that they leave for each other on the refrigerator door. And I read it in one sitting, very unlike me, like literally got up in bed in the morning and did not leave my bed until I'd finished it. It took me maybe like an hour and a half because it's really short, because some of the notes are like tiny, they're like one line, and then you move to the next page and it's like a whole thing. And some of it is like shopping lists and all that kind of stuff that you'd expect to see from your mum. But I just found it really powerful. I think without getting too deep and, I don't know, oversharing, which is my baseline.
Be it deep and sharing as you wish to be on the internet.
Yeah, you know what? We're going there, Jordan. We're going to do this. Growing up, my mum has epilepsy. She has nearly died multiple times. particularly when I was like a much younger kid. There were a couple of occasions where I saved her life because I had to call an ambulance and whatever, which I'm always like, it sounds a bit dramatic saying saved her life. Like I picked up the phone and dialed the same number 3 times. But apparently that's impressive when you're 3. Anyway.
It is. I've got a nearly
Yeah.
3-year-old. I'm not convinced he could do that, so it's quite...
But anyway, this book was, without being spoilery, it explores the mother having an illness and how the daughter deals with that. And also it's got that whole theme running through it, but then it's like undercut by the daughter being like, oh, but I want like my new clothes and like none of the boys fancy me. And I was like, it was the first book where I felt like that really conflicty experience that I had when I was a teenager, where I felt like I had to be a grown up because otherwise someone could die. But also, like, why does no one want to kiss me? Was like just interwoven really beautifully. And I felt like it just put on a page, fictionalized, and not the same story that I have at all. It just made me sob, and it felt like this really cathartic release of like, someone else out there has experienced what I've experienced. And I thought it was beautiful. And I read it about a year and a half ago, and I still like, when people like, what one book that, when you see on Instagram, people like, persuade me to read one book or tell me one book I have to read. I'm always like, if you want to know me, read that book.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really powerful. I think I know what you mean. It's nice to read something and think, oh, I completely 100% know exactly what the author was thinking and feeling when they put that on.
It's interesting. I've seen some reviews of it where people are like, why would you explore this through notes? Like, why would the mother tell her daughter that through a note on a refrigerator door? Like, it just seems insensitive. And I'm like, families are imperfect. People can't communicate with each other. Sometimes you do send someone a text when you should have had a conversation with them. It just felt really real to me. Even though it's probably like bits of it are a little, maybe you could argue a little contrived, that you probably wouldn't say some of the stuff that they say to each other.
Yeah.
But
that's the medium. That's that's the format.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I like the concept of it, and I thought it was really well executed. And also, despite the fact that I can't picture things in my head, the second that I was reading it, I had this really vivid memory of being stood in my friend's kitchen, and her mum used to leave notes for each other because they'd be like coming and going, and her mum was a single mum. And the whole book, I felt like I was in that kitchen as a teenager again, and we were like picking up the notes. And yeah, it was really vivid in a way that I don't normally experience.
Yeah, it does slightly harken to a time when we didn't have things like social media and WhatsApp and people just like constantly like sending each other communications in other ways. Oh, I'm always quite envious, like that the reviewer you mentioned, I'm always quite envious of people who are like, oh, why would that family do that completely unhealthy thing? It's you lived all a nice life.
Yeah, exactly. I was supposed to. I'd not really thought of that before, but maybe it does. I think it probably is more evocative of like when we were, because there were like mobile phones and stuff when I was a teenager, but they were in like their primitive state. Like it was a Nokia brick with snake on it, and you'd like
pressing 3 or 4 times to get one letter.
100%. I remember when Bluetooth first came out and someone like sent me a 10-second clip of a Katy Perry song so that I could have it as my ringtone, and it was like mind blowing. Honestly, it was insane. So yeah, maybe I do miss like not being contactable all of the time.
It's a good system. The fridge door is a good system. We have a sort of corkboard whiteboard thing in our kitchen, which is an interesting insight into what's going on in our lives at that particular moment, even if we're not sending notes to each other. So yeah, I think that's a really nice one to finish up the list with. If you would you just go through all 5 of the books so that if anyone wanted to take notes and go shopping?
I had Landlines by Raina Wynn, which was the one about the journey. James Herriot's It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet, though in all honesty, any book in that series is amazing. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Juliet Suka's The Buddha in the Attic. And then finally, Life on the Refrigerator Door by Alice Coupiers. But I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. And I don't know why Alice would listen to this podcast ever, but if she does, I'm so sorry.
I'm sure she'll forgive you. So you mentioned you had some honourable mentions to go with that.
I do.
Was it difficult?
You know what it was? Because I feel
animals?
like I kept putting stuff on and then being like, no, I don't know. And I think I wanted to pick books that felt like they connected me to other people, to different parts of my life, if they were the only ones I could take with me. But my honourable mentions, one of these is funnier than the others. The first one is Percy the Park Keeper by Nick Butterworth. It is a children's book. So you know how I said that I had a cull of all of my books? I've never got rid of this book. It is falling apart. It's just about a park keeper that lives in a house who looks after animals in a park. And it's a book from my childhood that I will never ever get rid of. I just absolutely love it. I haven't read it in years because why would I?
I like to think I feel like everyone's got one of those. I've got a copy of The Giraffe and the Pally and Me by Roald Dahl that my nan used to read me when I was very small.
I think we all have that one. I know. And I nearly put it on the list and then I was like, I can't speak about it enough.
Yeah.
But it feels like an honourable mention because in truth...
It's like a security blanket.
In truth,
it's so for you to keep it.
Yeah. If there was a fire and I had to grab 5 things, it'd probably be one of them. Do you know what I mean? Assuming that my cat and husband were out of the house. Speaking of husband, the other one that was going to be an honourable mention that reminds me of him is Night Sky with X Wounds by Ocean Vuong. So I think a lot of people have read his novel. The name escapes me, but it's on my to-be read list. But this is his poetry collection. So he's a Vietnamese American poet and it explores his family's journey from Vietnam to America, and it's really beautiful and heartfelt, and it is a book that it was the first book that my husband ever bought me, and I was like, okay, this guy gets it, you can stay. Correct, thank you.
He's been paying attention, he understood the assignment.
And then my final one, which probably is where some of my love for terrible, you know what's coming, don't you, Jordan? I can see you laughing.
I'm surprised it's not been mentioned before.
And you know what? It was on the list and then I was like, do I want to? It's Twilight. I mention this book all the time. But you know what? I feel like when I'm mentioning it, I'm not mentioning the book, I'm mentioning the films. And I think if this had been a podcast about what 5 films would you take with you, they would all be fantasy, weird, terrible AI baby films. But yeah, Twilight was like that seminal kind of teenage thing where I was like, vampires and werewolves are cool. And it was like the first thing that I really embraced that was like super popular. I think I was one of those kids where I was like, oh, I'm so emo and I'm so different.
Yeah, I've got to be a hipster.
I don't like things that are popular. And you know what? I was actually reflecting on this the other day because I'm turning 30 in a couple of weeks and I was like, God, I wish I could go back and punch 15-year-old me in the face. Popular things are cool. It's actually okay to like things that lots of people like. And also pink is not the devil. Just wear a bit of pink if you like it. Like, why are you being so annoying? I have a lot of love for my teenage self, but like, she would have really benefited from just being a bit more chill. And Twilight was that thing where everybody loved it and I didn't care that everybody loved it. I was like, I love it too. So yeah, that is...
But just to be edgy, you were like Team Carlisle. You're like, oh, nobody else.
Oh no, I had a Team Jacob hoodie that I wore 2 times.
Team Jacob
I literally wore it.
But
we live and we learn. We weren't to know that he would love a baby. What the hell, Stephanie? Why did you do us so dirty?
It was Taylor Lautner. It's Taylor Lautner's fault.
Yeah, it's 100% Taylor Lautner's fault. And also, I think because everybody else was Team Edward, I was like, okay, well, I'll be a bit edgy. I'm like Jacob. Now I am 100% Team Charlie, that poor man. Yeah. He was put through the ringer.
Oh, cheap swan.
Cheap swan, doing the Lord's work, trying to save his daughter from literally the worst kind of people. Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how he didn't have a heart attack. But yeah, I do. I love it. I love the films. They're terrible. And I'm very excited. There's like a Netflix adaptation of the story from Edward's perspective coming out.
Midnight Sun, animation.
Yeah, and I'm terrified because I just don't think it's going to be as bad as the films, and therefore I'm going to be really let down by it. Because I feel like Twilight was like a massive global production, that felt like a B-rate movie. I love that for it.
I think if they're going to do the animated series because obviously the first Twilight movie had that great blue filter, they need to have the same blue filter on the animated series to make it accurate.
If it doesn't, it'll be a massive letdown. I think regardless of what they do with it, it's probably going to be a weird, massive letdown. But will I absolutely devour it? Yes, I will.
We're in a golden age of remakes, apparently. No one wants to make new things. That's a lot of really big companies that should be spending their money elsewhere are making reboots of things to make a lot of money.
Such a bugbear that nobody has ever made an adaptation, to the best of my knowledge, of Terry Pratchett's young adult series about Tiffany Aching, because they were on my last honourable mention. I nearly put those in as well, because I love Terry Pratchett, but specifically like that young adult series. I'm like, why has no one made a TV series about this? It would be so good. Little ginger Scottish man. That's also dodgy. What was Terry thinking? God rest his soul.
All the best things, I'm sure.
All the best things, but yeah, it's that would be an amazing TV series, and it's an amazing series of books for people who want to get into fantasy.
We had given up hope that Percy Jackson would get the on-screen adaptation it deserved. You never know. Might happen.
Never read Percy Jackson.
It's my love.
I know. I've been told by quite a few people now that like I need to just go back and read it, and I think I'm going to, because I saw
next time you're in a reading slump and you need something like quick, easy to get through, pick up Percy Jackson. Yeah, that'll be the time.
I absolutely will.
Amazing. So that's such an interesting and very varied list. I'm glad we got Twilight in there. I was getting worried. I saw us coming up towards
literally
Twilight.
No, so I saw Meg, who's been on this podcast before, and I said to her that I was doing this today, and she was like, "Oh, I already know Twilight's going to be one of them." And I was like, "Oh, do you? Oh, do you now?" But yeah, obviously, I am going to be buying myself. There's a sticker that I've seen on Etsy that says, "This is the Kindle of a Killer Bella." I'm buying it 100%. That is a need, not a want. We're waiting for paywall, and that is getting ordered.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so good. I've started putting stickers on my Kindle. I may have to go and make a purchase after this.
I was gonna say I'll send you the link.
Okay, if listeners wanted to hear more about your book recommendations and the books you like and also don't like, she's got a great 1-star review on her Instagram at the moment.
Kidding.
Where can they find you? Where can they find you on the internet?
Okay, so on the internet, you can find me on Instagram at poemsfromthepath. It was meant to be a poetry Instagram, and then I realised that I like reading more than I like writing. So yeah, Poems from the Path. And I'm also at basically every Duke club there is going. So if you live in like Staffordshire Moorlands / Stoke-on-Trent, come along. There is a great little gang of us that get together 3 times a month. Not all of the same people are there. We roll around and we just come and talk about what we've been reading. It's like books to last live, basically, at this point.
It's always a really good time. My absolute favourite outings of every month are Duke Club meetings. It's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Hardcore agree.
So definitely go and follow Cara at Poems to the Path. And if you like the podcast, follow our social media at Books to Last Pod on just Instagram now, because I have given up on social media as a concept. So yeah, at Books to Last Pod, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Cara, thank you so much for your time. It's been so much fun. My face hurts from laughing.
Oh no, thank you so much for having me. This has gone way smoother than I expected it to. And I don't think I've sworn, which is a small miracle because I have such a dirty mouth.
We're pros here. We're definitely... Yes, we're definitely pros at talking about books. So yes, Cara, thank you so much for being on. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bye for now.